In this episode, I'm going to talk with Pervez Mohammed at Prism Market Solutions LLC. Pervez is an international business development consultant solving marketing, sales, and market development challenges. In this conversation, we're going to discuss Pervez's international background and global experience in the supply chain, the importance of seeking great market intelligence to thrive in today's global world, and then finally, Pervez's view on the impact of coronavirus on the supply chain. So, to start off, Pervez, how's it going?
Very good, thank you. It is a great day.
Oh, it's a wonderful day. We're both based in Massachusetts right now, so we both get a nice sunny day.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so to start off, Pervez, currently you're the principal and president at Prism Market Solutions. Can you share a little bit about what you're currently doing?
Well, I'm a manufacturer's rep. I used to work with a company called Friesland Campina in the Netherlands before I moved to the US in the year 2000. Friesland Campina is a $12 billion dairy cooperative. It operates in about 36 countries and exports to over 100 plus countries. I was on the export side of the business, which was mainly market development, and I was head of marketing in Friesland Campina's export business before they moved me to the US in 2000 as VP of business development. And as large companies go, they changed their plans in 2 years' time because they acquired another company back there and said, "You come back to Europe." And I said, "No, I think I'll stay here." So that's how I stayed on in the US. I actually signed off the ship, and I've since then been representing Friesland Campina here in the US ethnic market. And well, that's been doing that almost for about 18 years now.
Wow. And now the crazy thing that I kind of want to talk about is you just have this fascinating career history. Can you take me a little through your journey, kind of where you started and how you kind of ended up saying like I'm sticking here?
Well, I'm originally from India, now a naturalized US citizen, but I started in India with a company called Unilever. It was called Hindustan Lever in India, and worked my way through various sales and marketing positions, and then moved on to Unilever Export Internationally, based in Bristol, UK. And there again, I was again essentially the job was of development, opening up new countries, new markets with existing product ranges that Unilever had, and then subsequently we, would try and adapt the product for the local market conditions and the like. So that's what I did pretty much, always in market development, exports, with the idea of seeding the market and maybe having local manufacture later on when it grows to a scalable size. So, yeah, my background is essentially in marketing and sales and market development, which is what I've continued to do independently now as Prism Market Solutions LLC. Um, and With Friesland Campina, I represent them as a manufacturer's rep. I'm their local market manager, if you want to call it that. But also a broker. I manage the whole shebang in terms of getting orders from my importer distributors, who I found, first of all, and then gradually grew the business up to a decent enough level for them to keep me on board.
It's fascinating. And I think a lot of why I think it's cool to have you on is just how your journey's been so interesting. As someone who has kind of that more international career, what advice would you have for someone who's interested in having that? Like how did it happen? How did you kind of start here and kind of end up where you are?
Well, having started my career in India, which was a challenging market in those days, we're talking many, many years ago. Well, probably well before you were born. It's 1970.
Uh,
Uh, Essentially, India was always a shortage economy in those days. These days, you hear about how India is doing great, but in those days, it was a shortage economy, and everything was controlled. And in fact, how shall I say, in terms of mindset, I grew up in a shortage economy. So everything was rationed, controlled. You had to be very careful about how you allocated your resources, how you spend your time and money. So in many ways, that was my background. And then from India, you always looked out westward, if you want to call it that, in terms of developed markets and developed economies. So in international marketing and international business, I got into it by way of my personal desire to get out and work in the international arena. So if someone wants to get into international markets, they must first have an interest in countries outside their own, not only for product purposes, but also in terms of the culture, the music, the food, the environment, and from that you sort of say, how do I make, how can I get to enjoy the culture and the food and the outside environment? Then you find a profession that takes you there. So that's how my career got started, really. And as an international market person, I think you said, what are the key factors? You must have an interest in other people. You must have an interest in other cultures. You must have an interest in other something other than your own. And one of my first experiences, I visited the U.S. for the first time in 1980, when I was actually based in the United Arab Emirates in those days, the old Dubai, which was a one-horse town at that time. I came on a vacation here. And I was amazed at how insular things were, how people, a morning newspaper was very much about your own little town that you lived in, not even beyond that. So that kind of threw me. But I have to say, from the 80s till today, the US has changed totally and has expanded a lot more, and it's become a lot more engaged internationally, and more ways to go, but still, it's very different from when I first came here. I couldn't believe when I first came here that this developed country called the United States of America didn't have a newspaper in a small town, which really covered international news, because they only talked about what was happening locally.
Oh,
Like I
see,
said, you know,
I find it surprising because you read a lot of like the new tech stuff and how it's like, yeah, we've become global, but a lot of what the conversation and everything is local. Like it's all kind of what's happening in my backyard, like about me.
yeah,
So it's interesting that you see it as like we've gone global, like, but it makes sense, right? We're a more global marketplace. Everything's kind of happening globally. It doesn't
yeah,
happen if so, coronavirus, I think, is the best example of we're a global world now, folks. Like
yeah, yeah,
what's going to
yeah,
affect one of us is going to connect everyone. What
yeah.
about, so I think something that's fascinating is like you said, like you started a while back. We don't need to throw dates or anything. We can make it easy. But how has the impact of digital, or what's been the impact of digital on your career, especially kind of in the later half of it?
You know what? I'm old school in that sense. I mean, digital was not a big deal when I first started. Certainly not. And then I'm in a late adopter, if you want to call it that. And now with coronavirus and everybody working remotely, I think that's got a huge fillip. And look at what we're doing right now. You know, the way we are operating. And I have to say that this digital readiness that we had behind the scenes has been a savior. I mean, it has really been a savior. I mean, I've been in, WebEx and other Cisco-based systems before, but now this is considered par for the course, to have a meeting over the net, do business over the net, consult your doctor over the net. And so, what more do you want? So digital is, I'm glad we had it, the systems back up there, and glad that we could run with it, because without it, we would have been up, what creek.
Uh, yeah, actually, it's funny. I just was talking to one of our data guys, and he was talking all about how you're like, man, like where we are digitally, like it's helped so much. Like it's got all the headaches. Don't get me wrong. It
Yeah,
definitely isn't the easiest. It's all learning new things. Everyone's trying to learn to ride that bike, but it is something that you're like, when you need it, you're like, wow, this is very nice that we have this in place. But
yeah,
I think it talks a little bit to sort of about how we actually even started. We met because I know you've had some interactions with Aborn prior to me joining, but the way we really started to get talking was when you were kind of seeking some market intelligence that from something that Aborn was doing on coronavirus. So,
yeah.
as a consultant that's working to solve challenges, why do you find market intelligence or kind of that like staying up to date on what's happening so important?
Um, you know, information, data is what gives you competitive advantage. You got to have information about the world in which you operate and down specifically to your area of expertise or interest. And the more information and the better quality of information you have, the better you can perform in the marketplace vis-a-vis your competitors. That's essentially what it is. And I think, yeah, the seminar that you put together, and it was a time when one felt a bit alone, because I'm not in a large company. I operate and represent a large company, and I'm supposed to be their eyes and ears and information source. So I needed a lot of data and information. So for me, the subject matter that you put on your weekly at that time podcast was something which is very very relevant, useful, and I enjoyed not only meeting you guys but also hearing other folks talk about their challenges, because that kind of really added a lot to what we were going through.
Yeah, I think like you say, like we're living in this information and knowledge age, and I think one of the biggest struggles, and I think something that's interesting to me, or like I'd love to hear what you think about it, is how do you manage to find the time, and like how do you find what's most relevant with that sheer amount of information out there? Like it feels overwhelming of sorts.
um, Again, you got to pick out your key performance indicators, and I focus on my KPIs, let's call it that, and in that, for me, managing the supply chain was important. So and managing the market is important. So I kind of limit myself to certain sources of information that I think will help me. So and you guys were obviously supply chain guys, so that was important for me. I also have a few other information sources and seminars and webinars that I attend, and of course I do a bit of reading. So yeah, it's you have to pick and choose. You can't go everywhere, because you can be attending webinars all day and reading stuff all day, but when do you get the work done?
Oh yeah, that's the hardest part. Especially
Yeah,
again, there's just so much out there. I always have like 6 webinars a week at this point. I feel like I want to attend, but when do I have the time? And then, like it's also some of them you've been slapped on the wrist. You realize it's not really that valuable. It's just a sales thing, which I'm here for information. What
yeah.
channels do you kind of find to have more useful information right now? What are you kind of
Well,
gravitating
you,
towards?
yeah. Here are my. I kind of rely on a few key information sources. One is the Harvard Business Review. They have some very interesting material that they put out, and a daily alert I get from them. Then the other one is from McKinsey. Then there's something called a morning news beat that I read, which is a small one, but it's a guy who I met at a trade show almost 15 years ago, and he puts out a morning newsletter, which I find very interesting. So I use him a lot. He keeps me up to date. And then you guys, and then I go to the mass export website as well. They're relevant. So those are my main sources of information. Yep.
Do you have? What about you? Have you gotten to get into any of the audio stuff? Like, I know I see all those things of like, hey, ask Alexa for the market update. Like, yeah, hopefully
Yeah.
my
Mhm.
Alexa doesn't go off, and hopefully people listening's Alexa doesn't go off. But I don't know. What's your opinion on that? Like, have you gotten to experience any of those audio things? I know like they're trying to say it's everywhere, it's going to be great and stuff. I just haven't seen something that I like
No,
yet with it.
I haven't found anything interesting that grabs me. Again, like I said, there is a lot of information, and you have to pick and choose. That's for sure. And you can get stuck in all kinds of. I mean, hey, remember when we all worked in large companies? We would be in meetings all day and don't get work done. So I
Right.
learned my lessons, you know, fairly soon enough to be in meetings that are important. And when I was the head of export marketing, I made sure that we limited meetings to essentials and let people get on with their work. And so that I would get on with my work as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are learning that their meetings weren't essential. I think that's
Well,
the thing. Yeah.
yeah, and certainly with this whole digital transformation, that's what's happened as well.
Oh yeah. I
But
think I always keep
there's
that
a
like.
danger. There's the danger that you still get caught up again. Eh? I
Oh yeah.
mean, and that's what you need to guard against. Yeah.
So I think let's talk about that elephant in the room, right? The thing that a lot of people and everyone's sort of discussing, or everyone's that's listening to, like the COVID-19 impact. As
Hmm.
someone with like a deep knowledge of international markets, what do you feel is going to be the most impacted from this global pandemic?
I think one of the most important things would be the fact that a realization that it's all interconnected. We're all in it together. That's the most important one from my perspective. That, oh, it's been said many times, but now you can feel it. That's one.
Yeah.
Number two, I think in terms of connectivity, the whole digital transformation, the ability to connect digitally and to work remotely is the big impact that'll stay. I think certainly business travel will come down dramatically because not only till such time as planes get safe to travel in, but even when everything's kind of back to the new normal, I don't think people are going to travel that much. It makes a lot more sense to actually operate digitally, but face to face is important. So you would have critical meetings and discussions across the table, but a lot of the work, how should I say, ongoing backup work and prep work can be done via the net, and I think that's a very important factor. Um, the other one is again supply chain, your area of expertise, and very much important thing. There's this talk about diversifying your supply chain, which is it's not a new message. It's an old one, but people seem to have forgotten that you needed to have many strings to your bow, so to speak. And you may be driven entirely by cost to go to one location, but the fact is, you need to be diversified, whether it's your personal portfolio or whether it's business portfolio. So I would say that in terms of supply chain, you would definitely be looking at more than one source, and therefore, in terms of ability to compete and get products from various sources and have them delivered on time, and the whole shebang. Earlier, you managed one supply chain. Now you may have to manage multiple.
What about surprise? Anything surprise you from it?
For me, the unpreparedness of many people, many businesses, governments, our own not excluded. The unpreparedness was shocking. Was really shocking. Um, Again, in terms of the businesses I handle, were we unprepared? I can't say I was actively thinking about a virus and a business shutdown, but we work with long supply chains. I mean, again, as I said, having come from a mindset which is of a shortage economy, you always made sure that you had enough stock, you had enough in the pipeline, and that you were conscious of this factor. So it's in my DNA to be slightly prepared. Okay, like in that sense. Okay, of working in
Right,
a
right.
shortage economy. But yeah, the whole unpreparedness thing is really something that completely threw me and shocks the hell out of me, actually. And we have long ways to go still, I think, here in the US.
I think it's one of the more fascinating points, right? It's the amount of like resiliency and preparedness and all these like things that companies and businesses and governments have put in place. And you're like, well, this was the time for it to happen. And everyone's like, well, what do we do?
Yeah,
And I think it's interesting. And I think that point about coming from a shortness economy, it's fascinating of the different mindset. Like, but
yeah,
you're right. It's just being prepared and understanding what that actually means and not just going for efficiencies. It's probably
yeah,
one of the more important things.
yeah.
What about kind of the last question? And you kind of talked a little bit about this, but given that most of the audience for this podcast is kind of a shipper, what advice would you have for them as the world begins to reopen? What should they start thinking about that maybe the practices you knew that were out there that they weren't thinking about before?
I think, well, that's, again, each one has to think for his own business. And the important thing is to determine what business am I in, what consumer need or customer need am I satisfying. See, that's important too. Whether you're in a coronavirus economy or in a post-corona, it becomes even more critical post-corona to be very clear, focused about what business am I in, what drives that business, and then talking geographically or product area, you pick what you want to be in, and then you make sure that you have the supply lines well oiled and clearly laid out just to satisfy that business need. Yeah. And I can't say that you can be all things to all people. You have to pick and choose and focus. And some of it is a lot of nitty-gritty stuff. You gotta have people looking at details and specifics. And coming back to, I think I learned something from talking to you guys. You provide the service of actually acting as a supply chain expert, monitoring market information, what's going on out there, and supplying it to your customers so that they're ahead of the game. I think that's critical, and whether a company does it themselves or relies on a service provider like Airborne is something a company will choose whether you decide to do it. But those details are important to have. What's out there, who's doing what the competition's doing, what's making the world tick today, and what's going to tick tomorrow, what's fallen down, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, get ready to react to market conditions,
Yeah,
and then find you probably, hopefully, if anything, you're doing some data audits and realizing that like this stuff really wasn't helpful. This data
yeah,
is what I needed.
yeah.
Pervez, this is awesome. Thanks again for joining me today. If someone wants to get in contact with you or reach out, what's the best way they can do it?
Well, best is my office number, which is 978-470-2248, which you have. The alternative is my email, which also you have, and feel free to share with them. I'm happy to try and answer whatever I can, but I have to say that I'm very focused on consumer marketing of foods, especially imported foods, and I'll be happy to talk to them about any marketing or market development or sales problems that they might be having.
Yeah, I think it's always good just networking. I mean, like
Yeah,
like you network, you get to know people, you get to see people, you find like the trusted sources that are out there. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
awesome.
hey, like I said, we've never really done business, Airborne and ourselves, but I think that's not important. The most
No,
important thing is to have mutual respect for each other's experience and knowledge. That's what it is.
that's all it is. It's resource. It's the education and the information that's out there, and finding people that you can connect with,
Yeah,
so you don't feel like you're in this problem alone.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's the big thing, right? You
yeah.
always feel like it's just you, but no, everyone's got common shared experiences that you can communicate with. So, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for having me on your program, and I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the seminars, webinars that you put on.
Oh, thanks so much. Have a
Okay.
good day.
You take care. Bye.
Bye. And that's our show. Have a question for Pervez that I didn't bring up? Leave a comment in the video below. And in the meantime, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm MacNaught. Rock and roll.